This is our channel, Unlost Life.
And we are film couples, and this is where we will share our challenges and adventures.
This video is about what you need in your AOS and how to get it authenticated or apostilled. We will also talk about some other tips that could save you some money traveling. Quick disclaimer, we are not experts. This is based on our own research and experience. No guarantees, but we hope this helps. We have a copy of our AOS and links to several other sites about the authentication or apostille process on our page at unlostlife.com. If you could like and subscribe to our channel, that would help us get this information out to more people. Okay, AOS. What is it? It stands for Affidavit of Support. And if you're a Filipino or Filipina traveling outside the Philippines and meeting a partner, you're going to need it. It's required by the CFO. Immigration lists as a requirement. Even if you're financially capable of supporting yourself, if they know that you're meeting someone, they want that document. And all it is a document created by the partner of the Filipino or Filipina stating that the partner, the foreign partner, is accepting the financial liability and responsibility for that traveling Filipino or Filipina. It's not a set form, it's actually a statement. And this was a little confusing to me at first because I was looking for some official form I needed to fill out saying that I would support my partner. And all the example AOSs that I was able to find were all for family members supporting other family members. But if you look on the BI's website, it does give some options for non-related AOSs. And I mean, obviously, because the CFO requires it of a partner, like we're not related, that would be weird.
We're not related.
So it's a document you're going to need. There are some requirements on the BI's website of what it needs to contain, but there are some other pieces that it needs to contain in addition to those if you're a partner of that Filipino or Filipina traveling. The easiest way is just take a look at our AOS. We're going to have a copy of our AOS on our page at unlostlife.com. Our AOS worked for both CFO and immigration. We have read of some different instances where because there was missing information in the AOS that they rejected the AOS. I think specifically for the CFO, correct?
Yes, right? It's for the CFO. So you need to be specific with the relationship with the other person.
Exactly. So once again, if you look at our example, it'll clearly lay out what you need in that AOS. You can pretty much just use it and plug in your information. With that, it's not enough to just have that document. That document needs to be notarized and either authenticated or apostilled. Most of the time you'll hear the authentication, you'll hear them request the authentication of the document by the Philippines Embassy. That used to be the case, but now they have something called apostille. And the apostille process has kind of replaced the authentication process. So all the countries that are part of the apostille agreement, now the government of the country that you're in can certify or apostille the document instead of the embassy authenticating it. And all authentication or apostille is basically a glorified notary. It's saying that you are who you say you are. So it's confirming that your identity is accurate. In the U.S. is one of the apostille nations. If you contact the Philippines Embassy or if you check their website, and I'll put the link to it on our page as well, they will clearly tell you that they no longer authenticate documents. They no longer red ribbon documents. And this can be a little confusing because I think many CFO and immigration officers still don't know about the apostille process. We even printed out
I printed out.
Yeah, we printed out some of the websites talking about what the apostille process was, and even the Philippines embassy in Washington D.C., their authentication page talks about what that process is and how it's been replaced by the apostille instead of the authentication. So if you're in one of these many countries, and I'll include a link to the apostille nations list as well, to if you're not in the U.S., so you can check whether or not your country is included in that list. But if you're a member of, or if you're a citizen and residing in one of those apostille nations, you no longer go to the Philippines embassy to get documents red ribboned or authenticated. You now have to get it apostilled by that country. In the U.S., and once again, this is just my experience. It may be a little different for each country. In the U.S., the process is pretty straightforward. It's a glorified notary. The first step is to get the document notarized in the state that you're currently in, obviously. And then once you get that document notarized, you're going to need to follow the steps to get it apostilled in that state. And basically the apostille process is just going to confirm that the notary that confirmed your identity and signed off on your affidavit of support has a valid notary license in that state. They'll give you an apostille page that goes over the front that shows that document has been officially certified and apostilled. Most of the states, it's the Secretary of State for that state that does this process. If you simply do a search for your state, for my situation, it was Georgia, so I searched for Georgia and apostille. I was able to find the link to the Secretary of State's site that listed off the different requirements and steps to go through the apostille process. For Georgia, it was pretty straightforward. I simply had to send it with a return envelope. There was a form that I filled out saying, how many documents I wanted apostilled, and it cost me $3 per document. The biggest charge, or the biggest cost for us, was the overnight shipping both ways. So we shipped it priority overnight. It got there the next morning, and by that afternoon they had shipped it out. So we had it the following day after they received it. Mm-hmm. That may not be the case for all states, but that was our situation.
There is one girl who messaged me, Dave, because she was asking me if the IO gave back to me my paper, like the affidavit of support, and then I said yes, but all her document, the IO get all her document. So I think it's better to make at least 2 copies of your AOS. It will save you money from shipping as well, because having it apostilled is not that expensive. So better have a second copy. You have 3 copies, right?
Yeah, so that is actually a good point. So the cost for the apostille process, once again, for our situation, was pretty cheap. It was the shipping cost, which having a couple extra pieces of paper in there, or getting a couple extra pieces of paper notarized, is not a large additional cost. I did get 3 copies of our AOS apostilled because it's just easier to do it all at once. And just to toss this out there, you may want to wait until you get the list of requirements from the CFO before you get your AOS apostilled, because in our situation, they also wanted a handwritten letter outlining our relationship and different details about our relationship, and they wanted that apostilled as well. And because I didn't know that, I apostilled our AOS first and ended up having to send in for a second time, which, once again, the shipping cost, I think it was about $80 round trip for overnight for my situation. So save yourself a little bit of money, wait till you get the list of requirements from the CFO, and then get it apostilled. Once again, it probably won't take that long to get it apostilled, just a glorified notary. You may have to show them the documentation, whether it's the Philippines Embassy in Washington, D.C., or the Apostille Nations List, or whatever it is that can help them understand that authentication is no longer an option for citizens of countries in that Apostille agreement. And not just citizens, if it's where you're residing. Once again, it's like a notary, it's where you are. Another thing, they sometimes, well, in our situation, I know they ask for this. Sometimes they'll ask for the document to be authenticated in the country that you're traveling to. There's no advantage to that, and that's not really even possible unless you're already in that country. I mean, if your partner is coming to visit you in your home country, then that's easy. But in our situation, since we were meeting in a third country, that was impossible. There's no advantage to authenticating it or apostilling that document in the country you're traveling to. It doesn't make it any more or less valid. So you may have to explain that process to the CFO if they don't understand that. They accepted our apostille document, yes, even though they had requested that it be authenticated in Colombia for us. Mm-hmm. Also, if you don't happen to be in that list of nations that are part of the apostille, it's business as usual. You go through the red ribbon authentication process, and that's where you take that document to the embassy, to the Philippines embassy in your country, and they will authenticate that document there. And it's called the red ribbon. So other things to think about when you're planning your travel, transit visas. As a U.S. citizen, I was pretty much oblivious to this. I mean, I didn't even think about it. There are many countries that have restrictions on, I mean, it's not just free access for Filipinos or Filipinas to travel to, obviously. And even for transit, a lot of countries require transit visas. Now, some airports have transit areas, and this is probably old news for a lot of people, but for me it was new. And even if the country may require a Filipino or Filipina to have a transit visa to enter the country, sometimes those certain airports in those countries will still allow transit in the transit areas without having a transit visa. Turkey is a good example. Yes. It's actually why we picked Istanbul as her layover, because it had a transit area in the airport and you didn't have to get a transit visa.
I don't have to.
Makes life a lot easier. So just something to think about as you're planning and booking tickets. Other thing with planning and booking tickets, for us, we didn't know when we were going to come back or when you were going to come back to the Philippines. So we didn't want to book a ticket going back to the Philippines when we didn't know where we would be flying from or when we would be flying back.
Exactly.
So there are things called rental tickets. And for about $15 to $20, you can rent a valid ticket. It'll be a valid confirmation number that you can use. They can check. It's usually good for about 2 weeks. The service that we used, and we're not endorsing them, but it's just the one we used, was onewayfly.com. I'll include the link in our page. But it could save you a little bit of money, a little bit of hassle, instead of trying to either change ticket or try to get a refund. Just $15, $20, and you can actually request that it avoids certain countries for layovers, because once again, obviously if we had a layover for your return ticket in the US, I'm not aware of any transit areas in airports in the US, and so that might have been a red flag to either immigration or the CFO to check for visas. So once again, you want to make sure that it's just nothing like that to be questioned, right? Another thing we mentioned in the last video about immigration, but the travel and health insurance. I mean, a lot of people have talked about this. It's not like we discovered it, but Safety Wing, I'll include a link to their site. We used it. It was about $40 a month for us. It specifically covers COVID as well, and so it's accepted by the Philippines Immigration and
And
CFO.
the Turkish airline.
And Turkish Airlines. Another thing to think about, this is pretty obvious as well, but once again, there's a lot of things to think about. But when you book the tickets, obviously there's no guarantee when you're going through Philippines immigration. I don't know how many stories we've read about people who had every single document you could imagine, and they still got offloaded. I mean, that's sad, but it's just the case. And so making sure that when you book the tickets that you look at the change and cancellation fees, and once again get to the airport early enough so that you have time if you're Filipino or Filipina gets offloaded, that you have time to change or cancel that ticket and hopefully not lose a lot of money. Once again, if you can like and subscribe to the page, to our channel, that'll really help us get this information out to others. If you have any questions or want to know more information, please contact us.